Today on the All About Fitness podcast, we are speaking with Dr. Joan Ifland. Dr. Ifland is an expert in nutrition. And more importantly, what I really am looking forward to speaking with you about, Doctor, is your focus on the emerging field, what you refer to as the emerging field of food addiction. How are you doing today?
I'm great, and I'm so pleased to be here. Thanks for having me.
And I want to clarify that. I said food addiction, but I think you specialize specifically in processed food addiction. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's processed foods that are the problem. Real food is obviously not a problem. We've been eating real food for 7 million years. But when you process foods and you concentrate the natural endorphins in them, and then you lay on a lot of advertising, especially to small children, you develop the addiction.
You honestly, you hit one of the big pointers or one of the big things I wanted to ask you about right off the top there where you reference endorphins. But real quick, what I always like to ask guests is how'd you get interested in this field? First, how'd you get interested? How'd you go down the nutrition pathway? And then once you're down that road, because I believe you are an RDN, correct? And
No,
that's
no, no. I'm a
no,
PhD.
your PhD. I knew
I'm a
you had that. I
PhD.
wasn't sure if you're an RDN. And for
No.
listeners, that's registered dietitian nutritionist. PhD or RDN or should be only people giving out, in my opinion, nutrition advice. But when you went to get your PhD, what was it that caused you to study the field of nutrition in the first place?
So I grew up in a rageful household. Thin. We were all thin. We were highly active, but raging. There'd be these outbursts of violent rage frequently from the children and the adults. When I went on to have my two children in 81 and 84, I so much did not want to raise them in that household. And yet there I was breaking out in rage helplessly. I was doing therapy, I was doing exercise, I was doing women's groups, I was doing 12-step groups to get that raging to stop. And it would come out of me without warning. And it was just very humiliating. And I was yo-yo dieting. The two pregnancies back to back had left me with a weight problem, and I'd given up cigarettes. I couldn't do it again. I couldn't do that low calorie dieting again. And it came out in one of my support groups. Somebody said to me, "Why don't you try Food Addicts in Recovery?"
Hmm.
And I was like, "Why?" What this person heard was the sugar driving my behavior. So in January 1996, I gave up sugars and flours, and the raging stopped, and the brain fog stopped, and the fatigue stopped, and the circular thinking stopped, and the allergies stopped, and the bloating stopped, and the sinus infection finally, after years, stopped. And I was losing 2 pounds a week with eating a lot of food. But it was in the third week and when I realized that the raging had stopped,
Hmm.
that I adopted this as a career. And I would say technically, or not technically, but by education, by background, I'm an addictionist. So if you were to ask me about supplements, I wouldn't have a clue. I don't have a nutritionist or a dietitian background. I'm really a hardcore addictionist.
Interesting because I know, and these are all emerging fields. I know in the last
Yeah,
maybe 8 to 10 years, there's a lot of stuff in the news and the media about sex addiction. And
yeah.
just so you know, that's what my father and I not too long ago had a health behavior sex specialist on the podcast, and we talked a little bit
Super.
about sex addiction. But that's what
Yeah.
my father specialized in. My father was a PhD counselor
Ah,
who was doing a certain area, and then all of a sudden he kind of evolved into this role of people who were addicted to internet pornography, and that became
mm-hmm.
like his area of specialty
Oh,
was in that
blessings.
specific realm of sex addiction.
Yeah.
And you have sex addiction, and how does food and we're familiar with like drug addiction, alcoholism. They're all the same ism if you read through and understand the literature. But how does food addiction work? And specifically, and we'll get to processed food in a moment, but just in general, if you could provide an overview of food addiction and kind of how would somebody be classified or be identified as someone who might be a food addict?
Mm-hmm. So you cannot be addicted to what I call clean, unprocessed foods, because it activates the feeding part of the brain.
Mm.
Whereas the processed foods activate the reward centers in the brain.
Mm.
And there's the big difference. We have food, and then we have drugs that are being sold to us as if they were food. So this is the same thing the tobacco industry did. They put extra nicotine into cigarettes and sold them as a pleasure. They're not. They're just a nasty addiction. It was when tobacco came into processed foods, and tobacco bought Nabisco, Kraft, and General Foods in the space of about 2 years, 1985 to 1987, that we got into trouble, because there's a business model for addicting people. It's the business model that alcohol and cigarettes and processed foods and vaping and cannabis all use. So how does it work? Well, if you get enough addictive substances in your system often enough, you start to hyperactivate these reward brain cells: dopamine, serotonin, endocannabinoid, and opiate. And so they're pumping out too much neurotransmitter, and you're getting cravings. But you associate it with, say, television commercials. So by association, it's associated cue. Then the television commercials can start to activate that release of addictive neurotransmitter. So that is the kind of the neurological basis of an addiction, any addiction. One of those four systems is pumping out so much neurotransmitter that, and in such a short period of time, a concentrated period of time, that you get a high and then you get a crash. And in the crash is very unpleasant. You don't have enough dopamine. It hurts. So you're drawn to using whatever it is, whether it's pornography or gambling or shopping or alcohol or meth. Or they're all artificially stimulating those reward cells. You're getting a high and then a crash, and the crash will drive you to use again. So that's the neurological basis of it. How do you know you have it? Well, in the textbook, the processed food addiction textbook, there's one chapter on each of the 11 diagnostic criteria. You can diagnose this, that the American Psychiatric Association has built over 50 years of really intense debate within the organization. They're very solid criteria, and there are 11 of them. If you are experiencing 2 to 3, you have a mild case of addiction. 4 to 5 is moderate. 6 and over is severe. And as I wrote those chapters, there's a chapter on each one of those criteria in the textbook. That is when I realized that many people are walking around unknowingly with it's a severe addiction. It's not just a garden variety, I need to cut back from 2 glasses of wine to 1 glass. No, this is severe. It's life consuming. So that is how we know. This is straight up drug addiction. It's the most complicated drug addiction ever, I would say, for a lot of different reasons. But it's just drug addiction.
Well, it's interesting you say that about the commercials, because about a year ago, I cut the cord and got rid of my cable. Right when I realized my income was going to be severely impacted, I wasn't going to be traveling as much. One of the things I do is I'm an education consultant, and I do a lot of travel, and I work with a lot of health clubs. So when everything shut down in 2020, that kind of impacted my. So one of the things I did to cut expenses was to get rid of my cable. And maybe a couple weeks ago, I took my kids on spring break, and we were at a hotel. And I just haven't been watching that much TV. If I watch a little something, I might catch some news clips on YouTube, or I might catch something on Netflix. So it's not like I'm saying I'm completely off TV. I don't want to give that impression. But being on the on-demand services like Netflix, like Amazon, you are not subjected to the commercials. You're not subjected to the media representations. And I really noticed, Doctor, that just watching a little bit of regular TV, network TV, I'm like, wow, the commercials really are. Having not been exposed to commercials for a while, you really notice them, and they really are quite an impact. And
Yeah.
so one of the things that I can see where your work is that there's this association between, if I eat this type of food, whether it's a cracker, a candy, whatever it is, I'm going to feel this certain way. Is
Hmm.
that one of the triggers that these companies have realized that? Well, I guess the question is how these companies combined it to make eating much more emotional. We know that eating, if we're having a meal together, can have an emotional connection. There's a connection between people.
Yes.
It's my understanding that a lot of these processed food companies, there's one author that calls it the industrial food complex,
Yeah.
who, the industrial food complex has realized we can put these triggers out there to initiate this emotional response. How has that influenced this field, this emerging field of processed food addiction?
Well, we have, we're on to them. This is, it's one message I love giving to people, which is this is not your fault. This is a carefully engineered addiction by the same people who got 2/3 of American adults to smoke.
Mm.
So I call it, and I've published on this, the 5 A's of the addiction business model. You ramp up the addictive properties in the product. So the tobacco industry added nicotine to cigarettes. When tobacco came into processed foods, I hired a consultant, Howie Moskowitz, who has a PhD from Harvard in experimental psychology of marketing. He's a data guy, and he developed this process where you could maximize the amount of sugar, fat, salt in processed foods, and the consumer would still accept it.
Mm.
So once one corporation had maxed out the addictive properties of their products, everybody had to do it because there's a huge impact on sense of taste from this. And so if you have a tomato sauce that's got the same amount of sugar as 2 Oreo cookies in a half cup serving, everybody has to do that because it will blunt the sense of taste, and then your tomato sauce will taste like nothing. So that was the first thing that they did. They hired Howie Moskowitz. He went around and reformulated hundreds and hundreds of processed foods. So A is for addictive properties in the food. A is for advertising. So if you addict by repeatedly using the addictive substance, then you can trigger the addiction through advertising.
Mm.
A is for young age of onset. So we see that as soon as they came into the industry, the number of Saturday morning cartoon commercials for processed foods it was already 160. It went to like 560 in 7 years. So
Wow.
children were being bombarded with activation of these addicted brain cells. Then you make it very cheap. You make it affordable. A is for affordable, so that there's no barrier to buying it. And you put it everywhere. You make it very, very available so that you don't have to wait to act on a craving. You can go into the break room. Like when I got out of business school in 1978, I went to work for a Fortune 200 company. I had this gorgeous MBA from Stanford, and I worked at the corporate office in finance. There was no food anywhere.
Mm.
There was coffee in the break room, and there was creamer, and there was sugar. And you would never imagine eating something in a meeting. You would just be, people would be shocked. But 7 or 8 years later, processed foods come into the tobacco comes into the processed food industry, and suddenly there's processed foods everywhere. So this is a business model: addictive properties, advertising, young age of onset, affordable, available, and it swept the nation. People wonder, how did we get this obesity epidemic so fast? Well, those were very powerful corporations, and that's how they did it.
Well, it's interesting, Doctor. I was going to bring up your Stanford MBA at some point because I don't keep a formal list of people on here, and I should. I need to because I think Stanford. I've had more experts on here from Stanford than any other program. So just to let you know, you're in good company.
Oh gosh, yeah, I'm very grateful for that degree.
And how
It's
did that? So how did that business case approach? And I'm not sure if Stanford does does Stanford look at business cases? Do they do a case study approach?
It's a case study approach, yeah.
And so did that help you identify? Because it never really occurred to me, and I had a client, just to take a step back, a personal training client of mine was very involved in finance, was high finance, and he had actually worked. He was one of the bonds people on the RJR Nabisco deal. And when we were
Oh,
working together, he had me read Barbarians at the Gate, which was
yes.
about the whole RJR. He was featured in there as one of the financiers of how RJR, which is what RJ Reynolds, the tobacco industry,
Yes,
bought
yes,
Nabisco, and
yes.
it never until you said that, doctor. And I have to admit that I'm somewhat interested in conspiracy theories, but that's another podcast topic. And I will say that the last 4 years has ruined my taste for conspiracy theories. However,
Yeah, yeah.
just to let you know, I did not go down that route at all about this
Okay.
nonsense that's been going on.
Yeah.
It occurs to me, and I heard this said before, but I never thought about it that way, that absolutely in the mid 80s, you had RJ Reynolds buy Nabisco. And yes, we always had vanilla wafers, we had Oreos and other Nabisco products. But just thinking back to the last 35 years, since, and I think that was what you said, 86, 87. So
Mm-hmm.
thinking back the last 30 years, there's been an immense change in terms of how these foods. So is that really, so your ability as a Stanford MBA to look at case studies along with your training at PhD in nutrition, is that where you kind of identified that this is a very specific model of businesses saying, hey, we have an addictive product here. How can we hook people early?
Oh gosh, yes. It was when you look at my background, it doesn't make any sense at all. So my undergraduate degree from Oberlin is in political science and economics. I worked for 2 years in the Wisconsin State Legislature on their fiscal staff. Then I went to business school, and then 5 years at this Fortune 200 company in finance. And then I had my two children, and I was really too sick by then to maintain that kind of a career. But and then the PhD in addictive nutrition,
Hmm.
you think, wow, that's the weirdest background ever. You've got to have all those pieces before you can figure out what's really going on. The most important thing about this is that we have it validated. It's so when the tobacco settlements came, they were required to put on file in a depository like 40,000 internal documents, and they were deposited at University of California, San Francisco.
Hmm.
And those researchers are going through them. I don't know if it was last year or the year before, they published on the transference of the tobacco marketing techniques to marketing sugar to children.
Wow.
It's chilling. And they used a method called surround marketing, where you have triggers in your environment everywhere. So you look at Marlboro, and they have like a warehouse of logoed items. You can get a logoed lighter,
Hmm.
logoed jackets, and for children, they tried logoed book covers for high school kids. It's diabolical. So they brought that whole method over to sugar. Actually, the first
Wow.
purchase was RJ Reynolds of Hawaiian Punch in 1963. And the reason why a juice box is the same shape and color as cigarette packets.
I never thought about that.
Yeah, same. It's diabolical. But it wasn't until 1980 that the tobacco industry got really interested in this, and it was because of the invention of high fructose corn syrup.
Hmm.
So remember, one of the A's is affordable. It's got to be cheap enough that you can buy it all the time. You had this really nasty sugar cartel controlling the sweetener market. But when high fructose corn syrup came on in 1980, that that just broke that. That broke that cartel, and everybody was trying to sell corn products. So that was another piece. And then you have it's not conspiracy theory. It's very well documented. You had two researchers at Harvard, nutrition researchers, who were on the take from the sugar industry to make fat the cause of heart disease. And so
Okay.
you had the whole low fat craze, which just fueled the refined carbohydrate addiction, because everybody turned to refined carbohydrates. You had the very first food pyramid, which was run by one of those scientists, Mark Hegstad. The bottom row is all refined, highly addictive refined carbohydrates. So you can just imagine those tobacco executives jumping for joy. What? Not only are we not going to be dragged into court, but the government is going to promote these products. We have to get into this, and they did.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. I have to say that years ago, and again, part of it was my former client, was rather than shake my fist and go, oh, they're so. I just started doing the research and started investing in some of the same companies, and so I manage my investment portfolio kind of along. I'm like, look, right now, if it's not illegal to have an addictive thing, like I invest in MGM casinos, and I do that because of sports betting. Now that sports betting is becoming more legalized, I'm looking at the long term play of, because in all other developed countries, in England, Australia, and Europe, you can go to the stadium and place a bet at a sports book as you go into the stadium before every game. And you can debate whether or not the whole thing about sports betting, whatever. I don't want to go there, but I'm like, as long as it's legal, why not invest in it? Same with cannabis. I've been investing in cannabis companies the last few years because
Yeah,
you can have a
yeah.
debate on what you can have debates on it, but I look at cannabis products as, if we sell cigarettes, why not sell cannabis? We tax it, we fund things, and why not do that? And I didn't have any money. I didn't have two nickels together in the late '90s when .com was booming up. So I'm looking at all these things, and it's also understanding a little bit about addictions to say, if people use it responsibly, it's not necessarily a bad thing. So looking at that, let's take a step back and talk about the neurochemical, because I know one of the reasons why I invest in some of those products is because the influence they have on dopamine, because the influence they have on serotonin. And one of the things that I want to come back to, because you said, and I never pronounce it right, you said the endocannabinoid system in the body. And I don't think a lot of people out there are aware that we have an internal cannabinoid receptor system in our
Yes,
body. That's
yes.
why THC works. That's why CBD works. So, can you talk a little bit more in depth, doctor, about some of these neurotransmitters, what many people commonly call endorphins, but are really, I mean, these are chemicals produced by our brain,
Uh-huh.
but that are our feel good centers.
Yes. So there are four major centers, and different processed foods activate all of them.
Mm,
It's one of the reasons why this is such a hard addiction to overcome. If you're only using alcohol, for example, and you've only blown out your dopamine system, you can go back to the serotonin cannabinoid, cannabis, cannabis, cannabis cannabinoid. And
okay.
then endo just means inside yourself. So you don't really need the endo. Cannabinoid. Uh, so you can rely on your three other systems. You can learn how to activate your three other systems and still feel good enough to get off the alcohol. But processed foods don't give you that break. So the sugar and caffeine activate the dopamine. Excessive salt, the natural casomorphins in dairy, and they activate the opiate system. Fats activate the cannabis system, and flour activates the serotonin system. Gluten also activates the opiate system. So when you go for a fast food meal, you're getting all four systems addicted. You're getting all four systems activated. When you see a fast food commercial, they're all being activated. And that's why people are so helpless.
Hmm.
You're driving down the road, you're determined you're going to go home and eat that clean meal in your refrigerator, and your car just kind of turns itself into the fast food lane. Well, you have mirror neuron activation because you see all those cars lined up, and then you have all four of your reward system pathways, your addictive pathways are lighting up. Your frontal lobe, which is where rational decisions are made, that's where your braking system is. All the blood flow is going to the rest of the brain.
Mm.
You don't have your braking system. The part of the brain that said, whoa, 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 we're not eating that today. That message cannot be released by those neurotransmitters because they don't have enough blood flow to do that. So this is We are finding that because all of those are, when I say blown out, it means that they've been downregulated, which means that the signal is no longer jumping the synapse. The receptor has closed down. It's a C-shaped receptor and it's just collapsed. You can get it to open up again. If you back off the bombardment, it will open up again and you can start feeling good again. But that's the sad thing about this addiction, is that all four of your feel-good pathways are all collapsed. So people, we have these epidemics of depression and anxiety. It's because the part of the brain that makes you feel good is it's not working. So that's how you get an addiction, and that's why addictions are so painful. It's like being in a prison inside your mind. Yeah.
Well, it's so interesting because today was the first day back to spring break. We're recording this in mid-April, and today was the first day back to spring break where all the kids in my kids' school, and they're still in elementary school, we're going to school together. For the last number of months, some kids have gone on some day. There's been like an A group and a B group, and it's been whatever. But we're getting back to school, and I saw one of the other parents there, one of the other fathers who I hadn't seen in a few months, and I was like, oh, wow. I mean, I could tell he had lost some weight. And we were talking about it. And what he said, doctor, and I don't want to share too much, but what he said was that he's now on different meds. He had been really depressed, and he really realized how self-destructive his whole eating behavior it
Oh,
was.
good.
His
Yeah.
eating, and he started exercising. And I shared with him that I was going to be having this conversation with somebody who's a specialist in food addiction. But is it reversible?
Yes.
What's reversible, and what role does exercise play in that reverse? So if we get down trapped down this for whatever, we've been told don't go out. We've been in this whole pandemic, and that creates this cascade of fear. And then all of a sudden we get stuck at home and we're buying crap because it makes us feel better right away. That can shut down our neurotransmitters. But what role does exercise play in kind of being able to rewire and reverse how our brain has just been conditioned?
Yeah. So when you get off of processed foods and you don't have this hyperactivation of those pathways, you need to find something else that will activate them. And exercise is one of them. Exercise improves blood flow to the head. So one of the whole goals of recovery is to get blood flow back to the frontal lobe.
Okay.
Where frontal lobe is where you have attention span, learning, decision making, memory, impulse control. And if you don't have blood, people wake up from a binge and they say, why did I do that? I know better. Well, I know better is in the frontal lobe. And that part of the brain just got shut off. So you want to get blood flow back to the frontal lobe. 98% of the brain is running on an automated system, which takes in information, stores it, and then acts on it. It doesn't have any evaluation, this is what the food industry has really exploited, is they can just surround you with messaging. And this is why you cannot teach recovery, because you're trying to teach into this impaired frontal lobe. But if the rest of the brain is still taking in processed food messaging, then the rest of the brain is still going to be acting on that messaging. But what the frontal lobe can do is it can control the messaging that reaches the rest of the brain. So when you exercise and you're getting blood flow to the frontal lobe, you're improving the frontal lobe's ability to do exactly what you just described. Cut out television, drive a different way so you're not passing fast food on the way home. Avoid stressful situations. Stress activates the addiction. So exercising is extremely calming. And we do have a study showing that particularly walking will stop a craving. And I love going way back to evolutionary science to understand why would that be? And I think it's because people had to walk to find food. So your own natural hunger system would say, you're hungry, get up and walk, because you've got to walk to find your food. And then once you're walking and your system, your primitive system has gotten you to go get food, then you don't need those cravings anymore. So Exercise is the great leveler. It definitely will replace. If you have a craving and you can get out and walk or run, you can stop a craving that way. It's incredibly useful to know. But here is what is so interesting about exercise. We have another study showing that if you are exercising to quote unquote burn calories, and your brain is, then you're in the addiction, because your brain is thinking, okay, we're going to burn these calories and then we'll be able to go and get some processed foods. And I remember talking to somebody at a vacation spot. She said, I train so that I can eat the processed foods. I love them so much. It's like, no, stop doing that, please,
Well,
because it hurts.
Well, there's this movement in the fitness industry where, as instructors, and I'm guilty of this. A lot of most instructors have been guilty of this. Is if we're teaching a class on Saturday or Sunday morning, it's like what we're cueing the people in our workout. Hey, you got to make up for what you did last night. You got to make up for what you ate. Or you got to make up for what you drank. And there's been a shift in the fitness industry to try to move away from that thought process.
Thank
To
you.
say, don't punish yourself for whatever, but do try to activate this. But it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I really do think. I mean, I go back to my father, who when he was working, he's retired now, but when he would take on a new client, one of his he would require that the client go to a 12-step program,
Mm-hmm.
for like sex addiction, one of the 12-step programs, but it
Uh-huh.
also required that the client start exercising, that
Uh-huh.
the client start participating in exercise. And my father's like, if you don't do those two things, I'm not going to, your treatment will not work. He's like,
Mm-hmm.
in my experience, your treatment will not work.
Yeah.
And I've been a recovering alcoholic for a number of years, and I
Ah.
don't talk about that much on the show. But what's funny is, in the fitness industry, it's funny you mentioned alcohol, because I haven't had a drink for more than 12 years. But I
Yeah.
still find those triggers in sugar and how it feels. I can still find those triggers in every now and then. There's a frozen yogurt place not far, like right down the street from where I live, and every now and then, just I'm like, are you following me? Because every now and then I'm on my way home, and all of a sudden my car is at the place. I'm at the frozen
Yes.
yogurt, and I'm basically slapping my vein. For listeners, I'm
Yes.
I'm basically slapping my vein, because that's like basically it's like a junkie, and I'm
It's
not
the same
doing it
mechanism.
because I know a number of people deal with this, and I know a number of people that exercise in part to allow themselves to enjoy what they eat. So,
Yeah.
like anything else in life, there's a balance. And what I try to get people thinking about, doctor, and then we'll come back to a question, but what I try to get people thinking about is, I don't want you to punish yourself for what you eat or what you ate or didn't eat or whatever. That's not
Right.
worthwhile. But it's
Right.
understanding that if you are going to allow yourself to enjoy an indulgence, an occasional indulgence, understand that it takes about 100 calories to ambulate a mile, to walk or run it. It's about 100 calories of energy. There's a little bit of variance in there. So if you're going to have a treat or a snack, or maybe have an extra glass of wine at dinner, understand that there's an energy cost associated with that. Understand that there's an energy cost to say, hey, you're taking in extra energy. What's going to be your plan for expending that energy? It's not so much I don't want people to punish themselves, but it's like, okay,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
kind of like I look at it as like buying a pair of shoes or buying maybe a new suit. Don't buy something you can't afford. Save the money, then go out and buy it.
Yeah.
How can people create a healthy relationship with food? Because I know it can be very dangerous to start talking about this, but looking at it, is it really just trying to move away from processed food in general? But
Yeah.
what can we do? What are some steps that we can do that we could kind of reshift or focus on creating that healthy relationship?
Okay. So this is, these substances, these processed food substances, sugar, any kind of sugar, flour, gluten, excessive salt, dairy, caffeine, processed fats, food additives, they're unbelievably destructive.
Hmm.
Nancy Appleton maintains a website with 141 studies
Oh, geez.
linking processed foods with disease. So, what I think what's cool for the trainers is not to give the addiction arguments. So avoid saying avoid the idea that you can work this off. No, it's in there, it's done its damage, and now you're going to go exercise. But exercise is not going to correct that. What I have learned from the research is that if you exercise for mood improvement, this is a great pathway to controlling your food.
Mm.
So if you go to exercise because I'm going to think more clearly, I'm going to be more optimistic, I'm going to be more positive, which is the result of exercise because that's what those endorphins do, then that will support control over your food. That will support better food and drink choices. Um, Everything else about exercise, honestly, will support the addiction. It gives the addiction an argument. Oh, well, you can just exercise this off. So go ahead and have it. That voice that says, go ahead and have it, that's the voice that you're really, that's the voice of the addiction. And that is 141 diseases. So, and exercising for mood is delightful. It's fun. You're just gonna feel better, feel more positive about yourself. You do have that improved blood flow. You've got improved hormone function. Everything about the brain is working well. You've got that nice endorphin release. So build on that. Don't go and take away from that by using some processed foods or drink. Build on it. I've exercised. Now, what else can I do for mood? Oh, I could work a puzzle instead of watching TV. Oh, I could sing instead of getting on YouTube. I could dance in my living room. There are many, many things. We've got a whole list of them that people can do to keep building that good mood. That good mood is the first defense against the addiction. So I will tell you, over 25 years in this field, what I have learned is that for a severe addiction, you need immersion recovery. Most importantly, you need to be around people who are not eating processed foods. So just like AA surrounds its members with people who are not drinking, it's almost impossible to find people who are not using processed foods. So we've created an online community. And that turns out to be the single easiest way to eat a really superb food plan. Get around people who are already eating that superb food plan.
Well, is that your online? Because I think was it Dark DARC your online community?
ARC, very good. ARC, ARC, Addiction Reset Community. And yes, we've been building that out over 3 years now. And it turns out that Zoom is really capable of engaging what we call conformance drive. Well, we don't call it that, that's the name of it. Conformance drive. Conformance drive is the single most powerful function in the brain because for 7 million years of human evolution, people lived in small tribes, 7 to 12 people, and then maybe a couple of times a year, those tribes would gather into a nation of maybe 125, 200 people. But everybody knew everybody by sight. We didn't have speech.
Hmm.
So we couldn't depend on somebody describing somebody we didn't know as being trustworthy. The only way we knew somebody was trustworthy was through eye contact. So if you were in a tribe, you lived. If you were not in a tribe, you died. And so people were highly motivated to conform. If you were going to look for food, you went to look for food. If you were eating, if everybody was eating, you ate. If you were looking for shelter, you looked for shelter. If you were fighting off a predator, everybody fought off the predator. Your children would live and your genes would be passed on. The person without conformance drive, the one who wandered off, wanted to be by themselves, well, the giant hyenas were waiting for them and they would die. So the non-conforming genes did not get passed on. Each human, according to science, has this incredibly strong drive to conform. And the food industry exploits this mercilessly in the commercials. In the commercials, you see people sitting on a sofa eating bad food.
Mm-hmm.
And so you sit on the sofa and you're eating bad food and watching TV. You see people, happy families in the fast food outlets. So you want your family to be happy and you go there. So this is this thing, and we do have, it's new research. It came out in 2020 showing that if you're in a social circle which uses processed foods, it's not realistic to think that you can stop using them. So you got to pick your people. We are finding that we can get conformist drive on food issues, and people can still conform to their families and close friends for socializing. But this is all really breakthrough stuff.
Well,
Yeah.
part of this is so fascinating, Doctor, and I just want to respect your time. But I interviewed Dr. Herman Poncer from Duke University,
Mm-hmm.
and I think he did his PhD at Yale, either Yale or Harvard. So again, I'm just keeping the tab of the schools. But Dr. Poncer wrote a book based on his studies of the Hadza tribe in North Tanzania, and you talk about and what he found was that both the women and the men, the women would walk a little bit less, but the men, when they would go on a hunt, they're walking between 10,000 meters a day in their
Uh-huh.
search for food because
Mm-hmm.
they're still an indigenous nomadic tribe.
Mm-hmm.
That the women will go look for berries and fruits and grubs. The
Roots.
men would go hunt. And so I found it fascinating that you connected if you're feeling hunger, go for a walk. And
Uh-huh.
that was one of the things that I told you the other parent just shared with me that he's been walking a lot more lately. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just interesting to connect that. And then I interviewed one of your neighbors there, and now I don't remember where he did his PhD work, but Dr. John Medina from University of Washington up in your neck of the woods. And last year,
Okay.
right at the start of this, Dr. Medina was talking about, he wrote the book Brain Rules for Aging Well, but Dr. Medina was talking about these type of interfaces of doing video conferencing can be almost as effective as being in person
It's
because we were
amazing.
able to make contact and because we are able to do that. And then finally, to kind of bring this together and then ask a question is in AA in the program, one of the most powerful things for what works is surrounding yourself with other people and seeing is modeling that behavior of what when the research looks at it, they call it vicarious experiences.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
That if I see somebody who's my same, similar in age and demographic, if I've seen you gone another day without taking a drink or whatever your substance is, then I know it gives me strength to do that. So is
Yeah.
that how you've structured your ARC, your ARC community? Are you because I know there's a lot of issue out there with people say, well, I'm not an addict. But when you look at it fundamentally, as you've pointed out, this isn't our fault. We're being bombarded by images. And the other thing before you can answer is you are so right. If you watch any sporting event, the beer companies, Taco Bell, all is like bring it together, make this a social event. You're cool if you're having a beer, if you're cool if you're slamming alcohol down your throat and then putting in 8 or 9 tacos that you got at fifth meal on the 24-hour drive Taco Bell
Yeah.
drive through. And it's just like we are really going, it's like swimming upriver or trying to go upriver without a paddle. So in
Mm-hmm.
your community, that this online resource that you've created, ARC, what type of resources does it provide for people who are looking to break this cycle and become a little bit more just healthier, move more closer towards health?
You're right on the most crucial topic. What you're describing is that surround marketing. So you go to a sporting event or you go to a social event. It's always there. It's always being promoted. Everybody around you is addicted. You go to a sporting event and the vendors are like constantly walking up and down the aisles selling stuff. Everybody around you is smack, smack, smack and crunch, crunch, crunch. And it's overwhelming. So we know that that's what we're fighting. And I got this that the 12 there are food addiction 12-step groups. They cannot touch this addiction.
Mm.
I'm going to say something and I'm going to apologize for it in advance. This is the last addiction. Every other facility, every other addiction recovery operation transfers the addiction to processed foods. So you go in an AA meeting and there are cookies and coffee. And it used to be that there was smoke in the air. So they would transfer you off the alcohol and onto processed foods. And everybody's like, not everybody, but
Yeah.
people are 50 to 100 pounds overweight. And we have that in the research. We know that when people quit smoking, they gain weight. They're transferring the addiction. So they're still using substances to hyperactivate those addicted pathways. So that's one of the reasons why there are many, many reasons why this is a really severe addiction. This is the most severe addiction ever that's ever existed on the planet because it starts so young,
Mm.
because it's addicted all four pathways, because there are a lot of different substances that are addictive, because they are available everywhere, because they're being promoted by these corporations, and because everybody around us is eating them. So the 12-step food addiction recovery groups, they don't have clean food plans. They're still saying, oh, you can use artificials. They're still kind of stuck on the weight loss issue. You can use artificial sweeteners. No, you can't. No, we have new research showing that the moment a sweet taste hits a taste bud, it's about half a second for the impact on the brain, that dopamine surge. For fat on the roof of the mouth, it's about half a second before you get that cannabinoid release. These are highly addictive substances, and the food industry has manipulated our natural food seeking mechanisms to be addictive. So, what do you do? So, the arc over the 3 years that we've been running it, we've gradually increased the amount of surround recovery messaging that can reach the other 98% of the brain that's working automatically. We're using the 2% of the frontal lobe to control the messaging that reaches the rest of the brain. So we have 12 hours a day of live programming on Zoom or conference call. So you can pop in anytime, and it won't be more than an hour or two before you get a live event. And you are right. Only the frontal lobe, that 2%, understands screens. The rest of the 98% of the brain is helplessly taking in that messaging, storing it, and acting on it. So we have a big resource center with a lot of videos and activities in it. So when there's not something live on the screen, people can go to the resource center. We've got a private Facebook group where you can talk. But I think one of our best innovations are Facebook private messenger groups. It's just exactly what you were saying. So if I'm a mother of young children, I am not going to relate to the business people who don't have families. If I'm a male businessman, I'm going to relate to other male businessmen. If I'm a female businesswoman, I'm going to relate to other businesswomen. If I have bulimia, I'm going to relate to other bulimics. If I'm LGBTQ, I'm going to relate to other LGBTQ community members. So we're building that mirror neuron engagement all the time, and we're melding technology, the private messenger technology, the Facebook technology, the Zoom technology. Our platform is a Kajabi platform.
Mm.
We're melding these to very explicitly counteract what the food industry is doing, and it's working. So we have a pretty amazing retention rate because we understand mirror neuron engagement. Conformance drive engagement is the name of the game. So we're making that easier and easier and easier for our members. It's really fun. I have to say, it's really fun. You got a great team.
That's so cool. So cool to hear. And I have to say that one thing that I've loved about the fitness industry for the last number of years, and you have different communities, right? You have the CrossFit community. And the one thing that I think CrossFit did really well, I mean, there's some issues with the programming, but that's just high volume. Anytime you do any high intensity programming, high volume, there can be a little bit of a concern. But one of the things I think that community did really well is they tried to move members of that community more towards paleo. And I'm not a huge
Uh-huh.
fan of advocating any specific type of diet, but when you look at what the paleo model is, the paleo model is no processed foods,
Right.
eat more, whatever. And so when you see people make rapid, these significant changes, body changes, it's like, okay, that's paleo. And then one analogy before we wrap up that I try to make with people when we talk nutrition is number one is try to be a good B student. Eat right. You know what you should be eating. Eat right 85, 90% of the time, right? We don't need to be that. We don't need to be the valedictorian of our class to do everything 100%. But if you're doing it 85, 88, 90% of the time, you're going to be a good B student and understand that an indulgence once in a while is not necessarily a bad thing. But if you have very specific goals, that might take you off the track just because you
Uh-huh.
talk about the guilt and everything else. So it's just being mindful of that. And the other analogy that I really like to make, doctor, and I try to do this and I try to internalize this, is you said that the fast food example. Well, I mean, I drive a 12-year-old Honda, so I don't drive a performance car. But if I did drive a performance car, and I'm saving my pennies for one, if I did drive a performance car, I'm going to go get the best quality gas for it. I'm going to go,
Uh-huh.
I'm going to
Yeah.
do the research. I'm going to get the whatever the high octane
Hmm.
gas. I'm
Yeah.
not going to stop down at the cheapo, no name place right off the freeway that's selling gas maybe 30 cents a gallon less with the questionable quality. I'm going to go get the best quality gas I know for that engine. That's kind of
Absolutely.
how I look at food is like, okay, I understand that if I want this engine, my body to run properly, I got to put in the best quality. And that any time that I go to that cheapy gas station, i.e., fast food, processed food, whatever, it can impact how the
Yeah.
performance function of the engine. Does
Yeah.
your program, does the ARC resource, is that helpful? Is taking that mindset helpful? And is that part of what you try to get people to do is try to realize, try to associate quality of feeling, how you feel better versus, one versus the other.
Absolutely. The thing that frustrates trainers out the ears is that they can give their clients all of the analogies, all the information, and the client can't do it.
Mhm.
It's because the trainer hasn't addressed the addiction. And you, as you know, and your father knew, you can only address an addiction inside a community.
Mhm.
So I would say one thing to your trainers: yes, these analogies are unbelievably helpful, really clarifying, but they will not work on an addicted person
Mhm.
because they're going into the frontal lobe, and the rest of the 98% of the addicted brain is still getting that messaging and acting helplessly on it. So I have, you know, I feel a great deal of compassion for the trainers because they do have all this knowledge. They have nutrition knowledge. They're not getting trained in addiction. So please, look us up. And we want to partner with trainers. So we want to partner with health professionals, trainers, therapists. We want to do the heavy lifting on the minute to minute reminding, lifting up, educating. But then we need people. We need people in that physical space who are going to connect and give members exercise routines and the cheerleading and the encouraging. But though I just want that, so a lot of trainers now blame themselves.
Mhm.
I can't get this person. I had them for 2 years and then they fell off again. I can't get them back. No, you cannot. An individual cannot do this for a highly addicted person. Refer, refer to the Addiction Reset community. It's www.foodaddictionreset.com, and we will do that moment to moment reminding. We will block out the food industry messaging. And then you can have the fun of watching somebody, restore mood and restore mental clarity and restore physical being. That is so much fun. You're taking a monster off their back. But I don't want your trainers to think that they can do this on their own. It's too big of an addiction. It's too deeply seated.
I'm just thinking, Doc, because you're absolutely right. I mean, in the recovery community, and you know this well, I cannot tell you that you have an alcohol problem. I can
Mm-mm.
observe you, I can see your behavior, I can relate to your behavior, but until you and I sit down and you yourself might admit, you know what, I think I might have a drinking problem, and I can relate to you that yes, I know how you feel. Yes, I was there. Yes, I'd have to wake up and figure out where I was and where my pants were and be able to have that. And when you hear, it's so funny when you sometimes when you go to an AA meeting and you hear people share what to normal people sound like horrendous stories. And anybody who's been in recovery understands this level of humor. But what a normal person might hear is like, oh my God, that sounds horrible. In AA, you get a room full of laughter
Yeah.
because and the reason why I was laughing earlier when you were talking about cookies and cigarettes at an AA meeting, you described a good percentage of AA meetings is
Mm-hmm.
there'll be cookies there. There's usually a cake there to celebrate somebody's birthday because that's worth celebrating. But you are feeding processed sugar. You are using tobacco as a substitute I mean, because alcohol is essentially sugar, and
Uh-huh.
there are a number of people in a 12-step program like AA that are also in an OA, an Overeaters Anonymous, or
Uh-huh.
they're in similar 12-step programs with that, and you see that. So again, that's a laughter from being able to relate. I wasn't laughing at people,
No, no, I know. I know.
but it's that laughing to be able to relate. And the other
Yeah.
thing, and then to kind of close with this is one of the cool things about exercise, because when you exercise within a community, and I want listeners to listen to this, because when you exercise within a community, what you're doing is you're rewiring and repatterning. So you look forward. One of the biggest benefits of group fitness is that you are going to a community where you're all supporting each other. You're going to a
Exactly.
community where you're all high fiving each other. You're going to a
Yeah.
community where you are rewiring your brains.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've been doing the last year or so since quarantine is I've gotten a lot more into mountain biking, into my mountain biking, which is
Uh-huh.
there's a terrific trail system, and listeners are rolling their eyes, going, "Oh my gosh, he's talking about mountain biking again." But one of the reasons why I do that, doctor, is specifically for not only is the exercise benefit, but it's for the neurotransmitter benefit, for the
Absolutely. Mood.
serotonin, for the endocannabinoid system, because I know that doing something kind of on the edge, what I'm looking to do is trying to create the flow triggers so that I'm creating a positive neurological experience
Absolutely.
with exercise
Absolutely.
by pushing. It's one thing to go to a gym and lift weights, and which is all well and good. It's another thing to go whatever. And for listeners, if you had issues with processed food, and a lot of us have, look for something that gets you exercise that pushes you out of your comfort zone a bit, whether it's taking a new class, whether it's doing something new. Because am I right, doctor? Is kind of replacing that kind of that addiction of processed food by doing an exercise that might be challenging or new or novel.
Yes.
Is that a
Yes.
way to repattern the brain? How does that? If
Yes.
we'll
The
wrap up
brain,
talking
the
about
brain
that.
likes novelty, doing something new. You add a different, movement to your exercise routine. Your teacher adds, something new. You're more likely to go back to that class. So yeah, the brain does like novelty.
Yeah,
And
and
then yeah, and then just talk about mood, 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 mood. And I agree. Just drop this whole thing about somehow you can. It's like you would never say to an alcoholic, "Oh, you had a binger. Sorry about that. Just go exercise it off." You would never say that. No, that's like, I'm going to share my experience about my recovery, blah blah blah. You try to get them into an addiction recovery program. Exercise is not an addiction recovery program. It's a component. It's a fantastic component of an addiction recovery program. But the other thing to really watch is exercise addiction.
yeah, I was
So
just
you can get addicted to those addiction, the exercise high.
it totally is, and I've seen that. I've been around people that have that, and one of the things I try to walk the line on this with this podcast is getting people to recognize that recover, and I don't mean like recovery from an addiction, but physical recovery from exercise is an important component of exercise. Because if you do recognize that, hey, it's been 7 or 8 days since my last off day, or that I did a walk instead of doing a high intensity workout, it's just being mindful of that. And then
Uh-huh.
one of the things I've loved about this past year, doctor, that I think there have been so many challenges over the last year, but one of the things, and I try to look at the silver lining or the golden lining, is one of the things I think that's really we've done well, besides spending more time with families, is we've been walking a lot more. I don't know
Uh-huh.
about you, but here in
Uh-huh.
Southern California, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know about Seattle, but here in Southern California with car-driven culture, I have seen so many more people walk in my
Mm-hmm.
neighborhood over the last year,
Mm-hmm.
partly because they're working from home, partly because maybe they want to get out of the house during the day. But for whatever the reason, who cares? Is I see people walking a lot more, and I never really associated the role of walking with dealing with a food, like if you're getting a food craving. So I think I'm just looking over where my dog usually sleeps. I think she's going to be getting a few more walks going forward. So Dr. Joan Ifland, if you could again one more time, this is a fascinating conversation, and
Thank
I'm
you.
really glad that we spent this time together. But if you could provide the resources again, because I think this is so critical, because just from my experience, working with other people in having the same experience who are addicted to similar things, be it gambling, sex, alcohol, processed food, working with other people that are working through and recovering from the same addiction is essential
It's essential.
to taking control back over your life. So please, I'll give you a couple minutes to share the resources that you have.
Thank you. The first step to understanding your relationship with this, and I think it's a common addiction, is to go to foodaddictionreset.com and take the self quiz. It's not a diagnosis, but it's the 11 diagnostic criteria for alcoholism worded for eating. And you will see immediately, if you have 6 or more, you can just breathe a big sigh of relief and say, oh, 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 it's an addiction. And then you can go, we do have a program. It's a lifetime program, but it's very, very expert and it's very comprehensive. And you can get the essential piece of the immersion. So it's math. The more hours you spend around people who are not eating processed foods, who are thinking positively and exercising, the faster you will do it. It's math. It's really substituting an hour of television for an hour of ARC programming. Your brain, your mirror neurons, your conformance drive will engage more quickly, and you will be taking better care of yourself. Those decisions about food will become easier and easier. So that's a great place to start. We do have a very comprehensive website with a lot of free material, and all of our services. We're interested in legal proceedings. I'm a leading expert in the field. We're interested in helping health professionals who are traumatized by not being able to help their patients. So we got a lot of services. That's at processedfoodaddiction.com.
Hmm.
Processedfoodaddiction.com. And if you just want to get your toes wet, the first segment at Processed Food Addiction is all of our free materials. We have a free channel on YouTube. We've got food addiction education at Facebook. We've got some free websites. So yeah, you can go as fast and as slow, and you can just. I've done a lot over the years. I started writing the textbook in 2014, and I've just been putting material up on the internet ever since. So yeah, you don't have to live with this. It's like being in a prison inside your mind. You don't have to live with this.
Well, Dr. Ifland, I really, and I don't say this, I'm not making light of it, but what comes to mind is that scene from, goodness gracious, it's Robin Williams and Matt Damon from
Good Will
Good
Hunting.
Will Hunting, where Robin Williams is a therapist is saying to Matt Damon, "It's not your fault."
It's not
It's
your
where Matt
fault.
Damon finally has his breakthrough
Yeah,
about what is blocking him, and it's just Robin Williams' character over and over again, and saying it's not your fault.
yeah.
I kind of feel, and I don't mean to. I'm not saying that to make
It's
light of this
huge.
by any
It's
stretch of the
huge.
imagination, but
It's
it really
huge.
is. And for listeners out there, this is such a power. I want to say, Doc, this is probably one of the top 5 most important podcasts I've recorded in the years I've been doing this
Oh, thank you.
but because this is such, like you said, we're being bombarded by all these media images, and these companies have spent hundreds of millions of dollars
Billions.
formulating their products to
Yeah,
make them more desirable, and you went
yeah.
through the 5 A's, and it's just really, I mean, this is fascinating work, and I will definitely want to look forward to following up with you in a few
Thank you.
months and having you back
Yeah,
on and being able
yeah.
to provide more resources.
Thank you. I would love to do that. I appreciate you. This is a new topic, and it takes a special kind of podcaster to just bring this out. So thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you.
Oh, certainly, thank you.
Okay.